will give the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh! He doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
With 5 seconds, he's going to throw it. Howard leaps. He has it. Touchdown. Carolina back from the dead to tie the game with 2 seconds to go. There is a flag down, but holy smokes.
2 and 4 in overtime games. Carolina 1 and 3. Here from under center. Give off to Greg Little. Little pulls away. Little is going to score. Carolina wins.
Snap back, spot down. The kick is cleanly away. It is good! And it's with a 54-yard field goal. And how about them Tar Heels? They do it!
Possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Hunter Burns.
In his end zone. The punt, very high. Switzer will have room to return it. He fields it at the 40. Coming near side, Switzer at the 50. Switzer, 45, cuts back at the 40. 35, breaks a tackle at the 30. Still on his feet. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Ryan Switzer for 6. He is doing his best Giovanni Bernard impression. Ryan Switzer again. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Law Podcast. And man, you know football season is rolling around, guys, because we are going back-to-back days here on the podcast, and we couldn't be more excited to bring it to you. And boy, do we have a show on tap for you here. Not only are we previewing the offensive skill positions for the Tar Heels this season, but that's right, we have to react to maybe the worst preseason ACC honors list that I have seen. The All-ACC teams leave a Tar Heel off that it should have been on, no questions asked. And they don't give one player preseason player of the year when it was fairly obvious that he should have been preseason player of the year. So we'll react to that at the end, because last night when we told you that we were going to start with reaction to stuff, it took us a little bit too long because of how fired up we were about some of that stuff. Well, tonight, we're going to make you wait until the end, but trust me, I at least am pretty hot about this one. There is no doubt about it. So stick around for that, but enjoy in the middle some great content for you where we go through these skill positions. We're going to do running backs as well as wide receivers and tight ends tonight. Kind of lump those all together because it's a group that, is very impactful for Carolina. We think has a chance to be very, very good. And we felt like putting them all together is probably the best thing to do. And so we'll start with the running backs. And when you talk about this running back group, it's very simple. It really all starts with Amari and Hampton. Coming off of a sophomore season that was as good as anybody could have hoped for. Last year, we were debating whether or not he should be the starter coming into the year. Because remember, in the previous season, he lost the starting job despite earning it out of the gate as a freshman. Well, he was unbelievable last year, running for 1,504 yards, 15 touchdowns. Just about as impressive as you could ask for. I mean, truly one of the greatest seasons we have seen from a Tar Heel running back. And so now, as a junior, he is expecting to take the next step. He said this himself. Now, I went back and tried to find this quote. I would believe it was in the breakout room that he ended up saying that he wanted to reach the 2,000-yard rushing mark. But unfortunately, I could not find that specific quote. But, I mean, I wonder if it is actually 2,000 yards rushing or if it is 2,000 yards total, because he did say that he wants to become a more well-rounded receiver. That's something he has been working on this offseason. But, I mean, man, this would be some lofty goals for him coming out. I think we're expecting big things from him, but 2,000 yards, even total yards from scrimmage, is a pretty significant step considering how good he was last year.
Yeah, no, if he gets 2,000 yards, I think Carolina's playing probably deep into December as a playoff team, because he would need that amount of games, I would think, to get to 2,000. That's a lofty goal, and as great as he is, he's going to have, you would believe, a much more difficult time running the football, because at least the first couple weeks, teams are going to stack the box unless Carolina's quarterback play really makes them have to defend the width of the football field. So you love the confidence. This is a guy that, if there's a guy that is capable of doing it, I think he's definitely one of those dudes that has a possibility. Also, it might mean that Mac Brown might literally run him into the ground, which is something he's trying to avoid this year after the way he reacted last year when they would take him off the field, because it felt like he touched the football at times, 40 times a game. So, but I'm excited to see this season from Hampton, because he is going to be the focal point of the offense. And as much as he goes early on, I think Carolina's going to go early on, and I think he knows that. I think he's ready for the challenge, and if this offensive line takes that step and becomes a better unit up front, it could pave the way for him having as special a running back season we've seen a Carolina running back have in the modern era of the program.
So, yeah, I mean, in terms of – I think the 2,000-yard mark is probably – I mean, I think he could reach it, but I would say he'd probably have to be somebody – that at least has 400 yards receiving, maybe even more than that. Now, one of the things that we did hear, I forget what media member asked the question, but they said, or no, it was Andrew Jones actually at ACC Media Days, when he brought up the fact that Chip Lindsey's offenses like to throw the ball to running backs more often than they did last year. And so with the quarterbacks that Carolina has, you don't have guys. I mean, the two guys that are competing for the starting job, I don't know if they are guys that are going to want to repeatedly air it out down the field, especially a guy like Max Johnson. If that is the case, that might be possibly in reach, but it's really going to take a lot. I'm with you. I would say they at least have to reach the ACC championship game to give him a shot to play in 14 games. If he does, then I think he's got a chance. But the biggest thing for me that I'm wondering is, do you think that Don McCauley's rushing record could potentially be up for grabs? He had 1,720 rushing yards in the season that he set the record. Do you think that Hampton can reach that number?
I think it's on the table if he has monster games against some lower tier opponents. Like if he goes crazy against Charlotte, James Madison, and your FCS opponent, like let's say in those three games he totals 600 yards plus, I think he really puts himself in the position to threaten the record, right? Because there's going to be, you would imagine, a game or two where he doesn't get that 100-yard threshold. So you would kind of need some games to kind of outbalance the other. So I think it's on the table, because every time we've seen this guy the last 2 years when he's become Carolina's lead back, he's been nothing short of impressive. So, and yes, I think they're going to rotate him more often, but He also has big playability and has the ability to take the ball and take it for huge gains. And so I think it's on the table. I'm not going to say whether he does or not, but I think he has as good a chance as any running back to break the record since McCauley set that record so many years ago.
Well, because here's the thing, like, and we'll talk here in just a second about some of the other great running backs, but when it comes to like him compared to Javonte Williams, you may think that Javonte Williams is a better running back than he was, but he's not. I mean, I don't see any of these guys. Like Darwin Barlow is not taking away carries from him. If Carolina wants to use Omarion Hampton because they believe that he gives them the best chance to win certain games, he will be in the game. There is no question. They will rotate guys when they need to give him a break. But at the same time, like, especially in close games, they are going to use one back. Where when Javonte was there, when Michael Carter was there, where both of those guys did, the fact that they had to compete with each other at the same time is really unbelievable, the amount of production that they were able to put up. So, I mean, I think the path is there for him. And the thing is that they are going to use him more this year than they used him last year. That is not questioned. It might also be the most that they have used a running back in who knows how long. Maybe back to Gio, but I don't even think Gio was used that much because they trusted Brent Renner. Right now, I don't know coming out of the gate how much they actually trust this group of quarterbacks. So with that lack of trust there, I think there's a chance that, especially out of the gate, they lean on him. And you mentioned it. Games like Charlotte, NC Central, even James Madison, who I know was a good team last year, but again, a lot of changes for them. If he can put up some huge numbers, it's going to set him up to have a chance to break that record, which I think would be amazing because that record has stood for so long. And that's the thing, is that even if it doesn't get broken, the fact that Don McCauley still owns that record shows you just how special of a running back he really was. But I mean, yeah, that would be an amazing season for him and a kid that deserves it because he's so humble. He's not a guy that walks around and acts like he knows who he is. I mean, he seems like just a quiet kid that wants to go out and play a little bit of football. And I think when you have guys like that, they're so easy to root for. So I'd love to see it. Now, here's the question. And you were the one that sent the post to me from the other day. I believe it was my guy, Great Day to be a Tar Heel, I believe, who posted it the other day. The tier of running backs. And that's really what generated the conversation. Great Day, Tar Heel. That's right. And, you know, he puts Hampton 7 all time in terms of Carolina running backs. So in terms of all-time standing, where do you kind of put him? Is 7 a little bit too high because it's still just 1 year of production? Or are you feeling like that was enough for you to put him inside at least the top 10?
I think 7 feels appropriate because it really allows him the chance to move up and really put his name, and maybe stake the case for, in the modern era, maybe the best running back in the history of the program, if he does what we're talking about him doing, having a 2,000-yard season, breaking the single season rushing record, and so yes, it's 1 year of production, but you look at the 1 year, it was fantastic. You look at the year before, even though he wasn't the defined starter throughout the entire season, he still had moments where, like, we knew what he was capable of doing. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of set the scene for last year, and now it set the scene for this upcoming season. So, I think some people thought maybe it was too low. Maybe some people thought it was too high. I thought it was perfect because it allows him to move up the charts if he does have this type of special season. Like, no one, I think, is ever going to top Charlie Choo Choo Justice. outside of winning the Heisman Trophy. I mean, that's what you would have to do to top him, considering he was a Heisman Trophy finalist, led Carolina to important bowl games back in the day. His jersey, like on the field, on the 22-yard line, is outlined in honor of him. So I don't think anyone's topping him, but there's a situation where if he has the type of season that we're talking about, you could argue he could be the second best running back in the history of the program. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see the season that he has and where this conversation sits in December when we're talking about him declaring for the NFL draft and we're trying to figure out where he ranks among the all-time best running backs in Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, look, 7, I think, is, yeah, it seems somewhat appropriate. I mean, look, the guy literally had the second best season in Tar Heel history in terms of rushing yards. 15 rushing touchdowns is nothing to scoff at either. So, I mean, yeah, he's definitely in that range. I think, you look at him and Gio and where they're at, 6 and 7. I mean, if you're just basing it off of talent, I mean, these guys are way up there. I mean, they might be 1 and 2. Javonte Williams, I think, is probably right there with them as well. Now, again, that's partially because of my bias, because I've seen these guys. I didn't see Charlie Justice, clearly. I mean, if I did, boy, you would be seeing an old man doing this podcast. I don't even know if I know how to use the computer. Amos Lawrence, didn't get to see him. Kelvin Bryant, didn't get to see him. I wish I did. But when you factor in the other statistics, and I mean, like with Charlie, yeah, it's going to be hard to surpass him. The fact that guy finished second in a Heisman voting, I mean, we've said it before. We've thought guys could potentially come close. No Tar Heel has even come remotely close to that since then. So it's unbelievable. He is without a doubt number 1. Amos Lawrence is the only guy in program history to run for 1,000 yards in all 4 seasons that he was there. That's extremely hard to top. Kelvin Bryant is a guy that if he doesn't get injured, he probably ends up breaking a lot of records at Carolina, probably is the all-time leading rusher, and could have been a guy that could have factored into a Heisman race. He was really that well regarded. So all of those guys, I think it makes sense that they're ahead of Hampton. Mike Voigt, the Space Cowboy, as they called him, another guy that was just unbelievably productive. The second leading rusher in program history. And again, those things matter when you stay at a school for 4 years and you are a consistent producer every single year. So it makes sense that you have him ahead of him at this point as well. I think where you start to get into some of these battles is Javonte Williams, Gio, and Michael Carter. I would lump him in probably with that group. I also think Don McCauley is a guy that deserves a lot more respect than he probably gets for being a guy that still holds that single season record. So there's a logjam of guys right there. I mean, I would probably have him above Carter. Gio, I think if he has another season like he did this year, he will probably surpass him. And then Javonte, I mean, that year that Javonte had in terms of touchdowns was ridiculous. But I do think Hampton could probably pass him. I think the highest he could get is probably 5th. And that would probably be as high as I could go. Maybe you could put him over Mike Voigt. But I think the other 3 are probably still ahead of him, which would still be amazing, to be honest with you. So that's going to be a fun thing to follow when it comes to him, because I think he is setting up. There is no doubt in my mind that he deserves to be on that list already, and he is going to do everything he can to climb that list and become one of those program legends. Well, let's move on to the rest of the running back room, and it starts with Darwin Barlow, who is a transfer, comes in from USC. Of course, prior to that, was a running back for TCU. he's a guy that's had the definition of an up and down career. Both places that he's been at, he has established a role and then lost that role. And last year at USC, he barely touched the field. So now he's a guy that's getting an opportunity at a school at Carolina that needed some running back depth. And I think he's going to slot in well there. I don't think he's going to be putting up massive numbers. I'd be shocked if he carries the ball more than 120 times this year. Even that number is probably high. But I do think from some of what we saw in spring and what we heard from Mac Brown, I think there is enough jump in his game. He's a good change of pace. I don't think he's a guy that's really going to run through a lot of people. His speed is really more of the asset that you look at. But I think that he's a guy that appears to have that backup role sort of locked down. Then you get into Caleb Hood, who is just at this point, if he can stay healthy, it would almost be a miracle. Because when he's on the field, he does some good things. He runs hard. He's a guy that has had a lot of success in between the tackles, and made some nice plays, some big plays for Carolina throughout the years. But every time you think, okay, he's establishing himself, he can maybe be the backup, or a couple of years ago can maybe take over the starting role, he always seems to get hurt. For him, he needs to be able to stay healthy if he wants to keep a spot in this rotation at running back, because the guy that I think is pushing him is Davian Goss, who had a really good spring. Mac Brown really, talked highly of him during the spring. And then the people that were in attendance at practice the first night, all the media members were pointing out how great he looked. So from that trio, what do you want to see happen with that group? Because I'm telling you, if Davian Gauss continues to play the way that he is, I kind of want to see him in some sort of role this year.
And Mac Brown said pretty defiantly he's going to play. It's just a matter of when he plays and what it looks like. Is he playing if it's 28-21 in the third quarter, or is he playing when it's 42-14 in the fourth quarter? He also said that when Caleb Hood's on the field, he's, quote, one of the best running backs in the ACC. Don't know if I would go that far, but he has been a difference maker for Carolina. The biggest thing that you're wanting to see is a reason to justify not running Omarion Hampton into the ground. Mm-hmm. Like, you need to be able to cap him at 25 carries on a game-in, game-out basis. There's going to be games where you got to give him the ball 30, probably 35 times, and that's okay. It doesn't need to be every week, though. And so you got to have ability to go to your backups and get production. I think Barlow will be a nice change of pace back and could bring a different element to the offense. Caleb Hood is just a physical runner who just wants to find someone to run over. It's probably why he stays hurt all the time, because he seeks out what feels like unnecessary contact. But you look at Goss, I mean, that's a guy that Mac Brown said pretty firmly he's going to have a role on this team. And so the biggest thing you want to see, because you have depth at that position, is then figure out the exact and best rotation to utilize those guys that in the long run keep Omarion healthy and as fresh as possible.
Yeah, I mean, and to me, what I think it'll be is, honestly, it'll probably be Barlow out of the gate. And then I think towards the end of the season, Caleb Hood, if he's still healthy, and Davian Gauss will probably take over those roles. To me, Goss, there's too much potential there. Hood, I mean, look, I think one of the best in the ACC is that's a pretty strong statement, just because there are a lot of good running backs in the ACC, alongside Omarion Hampton. But I mean, look, I don't think it's the craziest thing to think he can be a contributor, and at certain schools he could be a starter if he was healthy, because when we saw him on the field, he's looked good, but it's just he is so injury prone. So, I mean, that's kind of what I'm looking at, because Barlow is a veteran, and if they really like some of these younger guys and they know they can be pieces moving forward, we know Omarion Hampton is not coming back next year. Like that's, again, you can try to hold out hope, but he's a guy that's going to probably be either the first or second running back off the board in his class, especially if he can prove that he can catch the ball out of the backfield and really make that a weapon of his game. I mean, last year he was solid, but I mean, if he passed 400 or 500 receiving yards, this dude might be the first the first running back taken, He's really that good. So if there is a chance to look at your future, they are going to do that, whether it's with Goss. Hood, I think, is done, but I mean, honestly, I couldn't even tell you. I have no idea with COVID years and everything like that. And then, another guy that could potentially get a look is Jordan Louis. That's another guy that's back healthy, hoping to prove himself. Thing with him is it's going to be tough for him to climb that depth chart because there are some guys that are really talented in front of him. And the fact that he had to miss spring camp, that opened the door for Goss, and he stepped right through and has succeeded. So, I mean, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But Jordan Louis is a guy that's going to hope to prove, at least to the staff, that he is a guy they can trust heading into next year, and they give him a legitimate look there. The other guy rounding out that room is Charleston French. That's the guy that, of course, comes in as a JUCO transfer. Carolina got him very late in the process. He enrolled in the middle of the summer, so the learning curve for him is going to be incredibly steep. He is basically, with 4 years of eligibility and a redshirt year available to him, he is a guy that is going to come in, he's going to redshirt, and he will basically be an added member of the 2025 recruiting class that is just coming in and on the roster early. Basically, the way you think about it, just what Carolina basketball did a couple of years ago with Will Shaver. That's pretty much what he is, just on the football side of things in that running back room. All right, now let's move to the wide receiver group. And this group is pretty interesting because there's a lot of guys in this room that I think are really, really good, but they don't really have that star receiver that we know going into the year where we're looking at him, we say we feel pretty confident that he can get to 1,000 yards. Now, last year they didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver, but if Tez Walker had played in every game, he probably ends up being a 1,000-yard receiver for them. The NCAA, of course, did not let that happen, and so that opened the door for other guys to step up, and that's what's helping this group this year. The guy that I look at and think maybe has the best chance to be a 1,000-yard receiver this year is J.J. Jones. Last year, the leading receiver for Carolina, 711 yards. And I think this year could take the next step for Carolina. I just, when you look at him, I think he showed you late last year just how special of a player he can be. And I think he's only going to grow this year, considering that you lose Tez Walker. You really lack that deep threat, at least from what we see in the starting lineup. And so I think there's a great chance that J.J. Jones is the guy that ends up being this team's leading receiver. And I think he could be the guy that ends up getting to 1,000 yards. The one area I'd like to see him improve is to be a guy that's more of a red zone threat. He only had 3 touchdowns last year.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's on the table for him to be that guy for Carolina. Just a nice physical receiver that can go make plays on the football. Carolina needs that in their offense. I think, yes, you want to have 1,000-yard receivers. I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing if Carolina doesn't, because they've recruited this position well. There's talent up and down the roster at that position group. And you have a bunch of other guys that, if they're healthy, I think are going to have important roles. You look at Kobe Paysour. If Nate McCollum, looks like the guy that you saw at the beginning of the season last year, those guys are going to also be impactful players for Carolina in the passing game. We know about the tight end usage and how much they like Bryson Nesbitt and Copenhagen. You've got Max Johnson's brother in the room as well. So Carolina's going to have a plethora of pass catching options at their disposal. I think the thing they got to find is a guy that can take the top off the defense and then getting more wide receiver production from your guys in the red zone. Because once you get inside the 20-yard line, teams are going to stack the box and not let Hampton beat them. You got to be able to throw the ball up and have a guy go make a play or two.
Yeah, and I think that he is certainly that he has a chance to be that guy. Bryson Nesbitt, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, is probably the guy that most people will tab as the guy that can go up and get it. But look, he was a guy. I mean, go back to that bowl game. I mean, his touchdown in that game, he showed you right there. He's more than capable of being a receiver that can win contested catches. And so I think that's going to be his role this year. They're going to need him to take that next step and become a guy that could be right on the precipice of being that 1,000-yard receiver. Now, the guy that I think coming into last year that we thought would be right there and potentially could be a 1,000-yard receiver along with Tez Walker or close to it was Kobe Paysour. Well, he's returning to the lineup, but the thing is that he is coming off 2 broken feet. That's incredibly difficult to come back from. Mac Brown said they're still being cautious with him because of what he endured having to go through the recovery for both of those. So I'm hoping that he's going to be 100% back to the guy that we saw in the first, 6 games of his career, if I'm remembering the stat correctly. He ended up leading Carolina in receiving yards when he was a starter. The first 6 starts, he led him in receiving, which is insane considering some of the other talent that was in those wide receiving cores when he would step in for Josh Downs. And then when he eventually became a full-time starter, I still think he has a chance to have a pretty special season this year, because I really do think that talent, when you take everything out of the equation in terms of injuries, he's probably Carolina's most purely talented receiver. But the thing is he's going to be potentially having to split time in the slot with Nate McCullum, who, is looking to bounce back himself. And Mac Brown says looks like he's doing that. And if that's the case, that could be what holds him back from making the type of impact that we think he's capable of making. What do you think about Paysour and that rotation there in the slot with Nate McCullum?
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying when he's on the field, he's a difference maker. He's an impact player. He knows how to get open. He knows what to do when he gets to football, which is make big explosive plays. This offense needs that. I know they're going to be rotating them both, but I think it also might be to a benefit of them, mainly to try to keep them a little bit more healthier. But also, they do different things for the offense too. So I think they're both going to have, assuming that Carolina figures out the quarterback. I think if Max Johnson's the guy, I think I think he'll distribute the ball really, really well to both of them, because that's what he's done his entire career, is spread the ball around no matter where he's been. We don't really know about Connor Harrell, but I do think that they're poised to have good bounce back seasons, and really be a big part of a passing game that is going to look as different as it's looked since Mac Brown returned 6 years ago.
Yeah, and look, I think they need both of these guys. Paysour, I think, is massive, because you look at what they did with him last year, and remember, he got injured. The first foot injury was the week of the Miami game. So prior to that, Carolina was 5-0. Without him, they were 3-5. So look, I know that there were other factors in that, but you could tell the offense looked different without him in there. I think he's the most important guy in this wide receiving core. Carolina needs him to be in there. And that's why, for me, unless Nate McCullum just looks that good, because they do not, and I don't understand it, they seem hell-bent to not play him on the outside, which I think that your best receiving core, and he's capable of doing it, they have played him out there before, is J.J. Jones, Kobe Paysour on the outside, and Nate McCullum in the slot, because they do like to run a lot of 3 receiver, 2 tight end sets. And it makes sense because then you're able to run the ball at a pretty high rate out of that. But that's the group that I think should be out there. I just don't see him doing it that often. You know, Nate McCullum, he's got to bounce back because, yeah, even with Paysour out of the lineup, he started last season, first 4 games that he played in. Now, remember, he missed the first game of the season with injury. First 4 games that he plays in, 27 catches, 347 yards, and a touchdown. The rest of the year, he had 16 catches for 144 yards, and that was with his competition in the slot out for the season. So they need him to step up. He has to be better because if not, it is not going to be a difficult decision to not play him. Now, you look at the other starting position, and it looks like Gavin Blackwell is going to get a shot to start again. We saw him start last year's game against South Carolina. He was one of the main reasons that Carolina was not able to pull away in that game because he just couldn't hold on to the football. And then, unfortunately, he takes that big hit in the game against Minnesota, has some sort of upper body injury, although I think we could pretty much all figure out what happened to him. And takes him a while. He eventually returns, but never really had a significant role the rest of the year. Now, this is his last opportunity. If he does not capitalize on this, there are too many young receivers behind him that he is not going to get another opportunity to start. I think they want him to be the guy that can get downfield and make plays in the deep passing game, but we're going to have to wait and see. I think this is a massive year for him because Chris Culliver is waiting in the wings, and he showed you last year, granted against Campbell, but he showed you that he is capable of hurting teams down the field, which is what this Carolina offense currently is lacking with Tez Walker graduating.
Yeah, no, it's make or break for Gavin Blackwell, a guy that when he committed to Carolina, we were pretty high on. It hasn't panned out so far, but all that can be wiped away if he has the type of season that his talent suggests that he's capable of having this year. And as a guy that can be a deep threat and really take the top off the defense. And Carolina needs that. As much as I think they want to run the ball and they want to be a much more methodical offense, you still got to make explosive plays because if you want to, that's how you're going to beat the likes of a Florida State or an NC State later down the road, where it's not going to be as easy to just walk the ball up and down the field. You got to have big playability. So I hope it happens for him. But the thing is, and this is where you got to credit, Mac Brown and the staff, man. They haven't started recruiting the wide receiver position, no matter the type of talent that they have in there that's experienced. And you've got young guys on the roster that are ready to make their mark on this offense. I think Chris Culliver is going to be a guy that in 2025 we're talking about in a major way leading into that season as a guy that's going to be a big-time player for that version of the team. So if Blackwell doesn't do it, they've got a guy ready to do it. And it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. But it's definitely make or break time for Gavin Blackwell in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, and look, Chris Culliver's going to have a role in this offense in some way. That'll be a guy that they will rotate in on the outside pretty frequently. They will give him looks. And I think he's going to prove to you. And that's the thing, man. If Blackwell struggles at all, I mean, look, he could still have a role because especially when you have a guy that's going to be running a lot of deep patterns down the field, you're going to have to take that guy off the field at certain times just to give him a blow. Man, Gavin Blackwell, he could be that guy that ends up becoming that rotational piece. He wants to be a starter, and he has the capabilities to be a successful player and a guy that can affect the game not only down the field, but in the intermediate passing game and the short passing game as well. He can be a complete receiver, but it needs to be this year for him because, yeah, Culliver is there. Also, Jordan Shipp is right there as well. This dude looked amazing in the spring for a true freshman. And I'm going to tell you, if it was just about any other year, he probably would be a lock to at least be that first rotational receiver. But There's a lot of talent in this room. I still think he will have some sort of role. It probably won't be as significant as he would like, but this is a guy, honestly, I think you look at what Carolina did the first year with Josh Downs. I think Jordan Shipp will have a similar impact to that, and next year could be a massive season for this young man.
Yeah, and if they follow that same model, that same blueprint, we'll be talking about him having one of the best wide receiver seasons in Carolina history, because that's what Downs did after the way they used him his first year on campus. So yeah, I mean that's the thing about this wide receiver room is there's a lot to be excited about. They have question marks. There's no doubt. Mm-hmm. What they don't have is they don't have a shortage of talent. And if you go back to the end of the Larry Fedora era, one of the things that he didn't do was he didn't keep the wide receiver room stacked with talent. You had a couple guys, but I mean, you saw that in Mac Brown's first year with De'Ami Brown and Daz Newsome becoming, really good all ACC caliber players, but you didn't have 6, 7, 8 guys that could kill you in the passing game. That's what Carolina has, and they basically have had that every single season since Mac Brown returned, and it's why their passing games have been as explosive as it's been the last 5 years. So, yeah, I think Jordan Shipp's a guy that, if you follow recruiting, like I know you do and a lot of other nuts do, that's a guy that, he made you drool with what he did on the football field on Friday nights. He'll be making us drool on Saturday soon enough.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see how good he is, just go back and watch the game that he played last year in the opener of his senior season. I mean, just absolutely unbelievable in Bank of America Stadium against a really good Northwestern team. The dude is a stud, and he's going to be out there. Now, there's a few other guys here. There's 2 redshirt freshmen and 2 true freshmen that are going to try to establish themselves as part of the rotation as well. Christian Hamilton, who's versatile, can play in the slot, can play on the outside. He's hoping for a bigger role. Same thing with Paul Billups II. And I got to tell you, I really liked what I saw from Paul Billups in that spring game. I thought he looked really good. I think he's another guy that can be a downfield threat. There could be something there for him. Hamilton, I think with the versatility, that's probably the reason that he might have a chance as well. Don't sleep on them, especially if there is an injury in this room or 2. Those are the guys that I think are capable of stepping up. And then, the true freshmen, they showed flashes as well. They probably have to wait a little bit longer. Alex Taylor, Javarius Green. But I think the potential of those guys, there is so much in this room. Like this is a really special group that Carolina has. And I think when you look back at some of the careers, when it's all said and done, and then look at the fact that they were all in the same room together, I think we will be talking years down the line about how special this group really was all together. Of course, there are some other guys that are on the roster. One guy that is not is Tylee Kraft. He is not going to be on the roster this year, at least as a player. He is going to be a coach. We absolutely hate the fact that he's not able to play. But he's still fighting stage 4 cancer. And the best thing that he said in his write-up, there were so many great things, but I thought the best thing at the end was he punctuated it by saying when he is able to return, he wants to return to the field and play for Carolina. And I hope that day comes at some point for him. I really do. So, yeah, with him out of the room, you then have the group rounding it out, which is the walk-ons. That'll be Brooks Miller, Michael Hall, Luke Osteen, Aiden Cloninger, Josh Espindola, Cyrus Rogers, Grady Sherrill, and Thomas Flynn. So then we move on to the tight ends. And this is a special group as well. Bryson Nesbitt, I mean, just an absolute freak. And a guy that each of the last 2 years, he has had spectacular seasons. each of the last 2 years. Over 500 yards receiving in each of those seasons. He is easily the best tight end that Carolina has had since we saw Eric Ebron leave campus, because he can do it on both ends. He's become a much better blocker, and he is a tremendous receiver. You look at the last 2 years for him, 35 catches, 507 yards, 4 touchdowns in 2022, increased it last year to 41 catches, 585 yards, and 5 touchdowns. What makes it even more special is that this dude was doing that while playing on a torn meniscus in the middle of last season. He will combine with John Copenhaver, a guy who pretty much had every injury known to man last year and still found a way to play in 12 games. The guy's a freak. He, I think, was really poised for a breakout season last year. As a receiver, I think we know how good of a blocker he is, but unfortunately, because of the injuries, especially the one to his hand, when he broke his hand early in the season, it just completely took him out of commission. And he had to really just fall in line and become a blocker, and he did that at a tremendous rate. But so you look, still 18 catches, 279 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I mean, this guy is the real freaking deal. And I think this duo at tight end is amazing. And I think both of these guys are poised for big seasons. I don't know if Nesbitt can reach Ebron, just because I think Copenhaver probably takes away from him a little bit, and some of the wide receivers. But I do think he will improve upon those numbers. I could see him reaching the 700-yard mark if he is fully healthy the whole season. And I think John Copenhaver can get to maybe 400, maybe even 500 yards this season receiving if he's able to stave away the injury bug.
Yeah, I think it's definitely on the table. A, because they're talented. B, with the uncertainty at quarterback, you imagine that'll be a big part of the offense, just to get the ball out of their hands quickly into some surefire receivers. The thing you got to talk about with these two dudes is just how tough SOBs these guys are.
Mm-hmm.
Playing with the torn meniscus, no matter the sport, is ridiculous, let alone a game like football that is as physical tolling as any sport out there. You look at Copenhaver as well, and how he battled injuries. I think it says a lot about their football character and how much these guys care and how much winning matters to them, because in this day and age of, especially for Nesbitt, who knows that he's going to the NFL, and Copenhaver, a guy that Phil Steele thinks could be an NFL player as well, with NIL money that they're making, they could have sat out and chose not to play while injured, but that's not who they are. And those are guys that are really easy to root for, and I think they're both going to have fantastic seasons for Carolina. I think you're really going to see the tight ends emerge in this offense under Chip Lindsey. I think you'll get and something I asked for in Phil Longo, something I asked for last year, and I think the injuries may have hampered their actual production, but I think both guys are poised to have really special seasons for Carolina at a room that is sneakily very talented and very deep as well.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, because then you've got Jake Johnson, who comes over with his brother as well. The good thing for him is he is younger than him. He's a guy that is coming in with at least 2 years of eligibility, possibly 3. I think it's only 2, though, because he did play in 5 games as a true freshman at Texas A&M. So, yeah, burn the red shirt there. But, I mean, you look at last year for him, 24 catches, 235 yards, 4 touchdowns. Wasn't their leading tight end, so in that secondary role, and I think still really thrived. And so this dude has a chance to be Carolina's next great guy. The thing is are they going to use him like they used Kamari Morales? Because Kamari Morales played quite a bit for Carolina. For me, it's tough. I don't know. I could see the case of why, because I do think that there is a lot of talent there for him, especially as a receiver. But, I mean, when you got guys like Nesbitt and Copenhaver, it's going to be hard to take those guys off the field really that often. I think Johnston will have a role this year, but I don't think it'll be nearly as significant as the one that Morales had.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. And I think he probably even knew that too when he decided to transfer in, because he's not stupid. Like, he knows what was already on the roster and that those were established players. But I think an opportunity to play with his brother again was probably too good of something to pass up. So, but I do think he'll have some sort of a role. And I think the good news is, if something were to happen to a Nesbitt or a Copenhaver injury-wise, you have a guy that could step in and not necessarily replace their production, but the drop-off wouldn't be as steep as maybe it would have been in years past.
All right, and then you look at the rest of the group. Julian Randolph, the redshirt freshman, just hoping to stay healthy this year, got banged up with a lower body injury last year, missed the whole season. So this is a year, hopefully, for him where he can grow. He's been in the system for a year. He knows the playbook, all those kind of things. But now this is his chance to show the staff what he brings to the table on the field. You've got Ryan Ward and Timmy Lawson that'll be providing depth as true freshmen. Ryan Ward got a couple of looks in the spring with the injuries at that position, with both Nesbitt and Copenhaver off the field recovering from the surgeries that they had in the offseason. So for him, I mean, it was a great opportunity to get some reps, but he's going to be reserved to that depth role. And Timmy Lawson, coming off his own injury, an ACL injury that cost him the majority of his senior year of high school football as well as high school baseball. He's a guy that's playing both sports at Carolina. So he's going to be learning how to sort of balance all of that kind of stuff. And will take a year. Probably, I would expect him to be a redshirt guy. Same thing with Ryan Ward. But those guys will be there learning. So that's the important thing. And then you got the walk-ons. Deems May, the third, who we know was a guy that stepped up and started for the team last year in the bowl game. He's back on the roster again this year. Court Halsley, who looked really good in the spring game, caught a lot of passes for Michael Merdinger. So definitely a guy that looks the part if they ever were to need him to play because there were that many injuries or something. And then Cal Tierney is the other walk-on in that room. All right, guys. Well, we have gone pretty long on these, but I can't not talk about the what we had released from the ACC today. They released their preseason All-ACC team as well as their preseason player of the year. I'll start with the All-ACC team. The fact that Kamen Rucker is not a first-teamer is pretty ridiculous, and it honestly shows how lazy a lot of the ACC media is. I originally looked at it, and I put Kamen up there and put Ashton Guillette up there as well. But when you go on to the next page and you get to vote for the defensive tackles, Guillette, because he is a guy that is, he moves all over their defensive front. He plays inside, he plays out on the edge. He was a guy that you could have voted for on the interior of that group. I did. So I went back and fixed it, put Ruben Bain Jr. from Miami, who's a heck of a player as well, up there, and then had Guillette in with the group of tackles. The fact that more people did not do that is quite frankly pathetic, because this is a guy that was one of the best statistical pass rushers in the country last year. 15 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, but most importantly, 60 quarterback pressures, which was fifth most in the league, in all of college football. Now, Guillette was a guy that was ahead of him. He deserved to be voted a first-teamer. Ruben Bain is a special dude. He is not, coming off of last year, not a better player than Kamen Rucker. That's a huge issue. The bigger issue is that somehow Amarian Hampton is not the preseason player of the year in the conference. They went with a guy that was an honorable mention in the Pac-12 and who was part of the reason why his team faded down the stretch of last season in Cam Ward. And I think Cam Ward is the best quarterback in this conference. But the fact that they went with a guy that couldn't even make any of his all-conference teams over a guy that was first-team all-conference last year, but more importantly, a second-team All-American is just disgusting from the ACC media. And the fact that Cam Ward had 71 votes to Hampton's 38 is absolutely pathetic. What a horrible look for the media in this conference. It makes me sick that some of these people have the right to vote for Conference Player of the Year and All-ACC.
Yeah, it's just as egregious as what we went through in the preseason basketball stuff last year when R.J. Davis wasn't a preseason All-ACC player.
Yep. It's a good comparison. Yep.
And, R.J. goes on to be the ACC Player of the Year, established himself as the best guard, not just in the conference, the best guard in college basketball. The Kamen Rucker thing, the only way that and I'm not trying to defend it because I voted for him, obviously, is the ACC media looks at a good player on a bad defense, and that probably gets held against him. It's not right, but it's kind of like how whenever you vote for offensive linemen, you look at most offensive linemen that get voted for in the preseason or after the season, they're usually players on teams that you expect to be good, and then teams that are good in the regular season. When it comes to Hampton not being the preseason ACC Player of the Year, again, I voted for him. That was maybe the easiest thing I voted for in all of my preseason voting, was that he was the preseason ACC Player of the Year. This is why so many people have a problem with the way that Miami gets covered now. You're talking about a program that literally hasn't done crap in 15 years. Outside of one 11-win season where they got boat raced in the ACC title game by Clemson, this has been an irrelevant program. But they are to college football what the Dallas Cowboys are to the NFL, where every preseason they get gassed up that they're going to be this legitimate contender. Look, on paper, Cam Ward's the best quarterback in the conference, and Miami should be really freaking good. But there have been a handful of times in the last 15 years where they should have been really, really good, and they were barely a bowl team. And so it's frustrating. And I think a lot of people forget how bad Cam Ward was at times last year for Washington State. You look at the first half of the season last year when the Heisman was up for grabs, he was in the Heisman conversation because his completion percentage in an air raid offense was off the charts. Like at one point, he was completing 78% of his passes in October. But you look at the back half of the stretch where they faded out of contention and being really a relevant program, he was a big reason why that happened. And so I think that's got to be taken into account for. Again, I like this, though, for a team that has no expectations.
Yep.
Mac Brown can look at his locker room and say, they don't respect you. He can look at the two best players on both sides of the ball and say, you've been disrespected. You should be pissed off. You should go out there and want to kick someone's ass. And so I think it's going to be another motivating tactic for this team. And I've said it the last couple of weeks. This is when Mac Brown does his best coaching job. And the fact that two of his best players were disrespected by the media that gets paid to cover them, I think bodes well for them in training camp as something to motivate them and to kind of bond over, and should really fuel those guys to have spectacular seasons.
One of the first things that I thought about was that it was bulletin board material. That should be, honestly, it should be something that should be up in that locker room the entire season, because it is disrespectful to both those guys. Look, I voted for 5 Tar Heels on my first team group. Now, part of it was like wide receiver. I put J.J. Jones on there, and I put him over Casey Concepcion. I wasn't putting state players on there. Just wasn't happening. That one, okay.
I didn't admit that, but all right.
What's up?
Probably wouldn't admit that, but all right.
What do I care? I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, again, I still have more credibility than any of the other people that didn't put Rucker or on the first team or name Hampton as the conference player of the year.
Wow.
Like Bryson Nesbitt, I leaned him over Gadsden from Syracuse. But, I mean, I could understand either way. I think they're both very close. I think when Nesbitt is healthy, he is probably right in that same echelon. But either one of those guys, it makes sense. And then the other guy, Willie Lampkin, I put him on there as well. Congratulations to him. We didn't even mention that. He deserves it, man. He had a hell of a year last year, and I think he is a huge leader for this team. I also put Noah Burnett on there, but with kickers, it's relative. I can understand why they wouldn't have him. The other two are it's just laziness. It's laziness. If you said it, well, maybe it's because the defense wasn't really that great. That doesn't mean anything. Look at the receiver. I voted for another receiver, a guy that I think deserved to be on any of the ballots that anybody put out there, in Alec Ayomanor from Stanford. That team sucked last year. They were terrible. Their offense was garbage. It's been garbage for years. That doesn't mean players aren't good. Quit being lazy and actually do the job that you're supposed to do, which is cover this conference and do it the right way. I'm not paid to cover this conference. I'm a guy that covers the team that I support and do it from a fan perspective. So, yeah, for me, it is a little bit different. But, I mean, this is just next level laziness. And it seems to me like, yeah, you're right. With Miami, it's unbelievable. You said they're the Dallas Cowboys of college football. Dude, at least Dallas has a good regular season. Miami can't even do that. They're not a team that goes to the college football playoff and drops the ball, or has been to significant bowl games and drops the ball. They've been to one ACC title game, and they got destroyed in that title game. And the only reason they were there was because Mark Richt was great. I think they have the potential to be a good team this year. But Cam Moore did not deserve to be at the top of that list. Look, we've run over here. I'm going to step down off the soapbox. But the article is up on the website. You guys can read it, where I go in a little bit more on some of the members of the ACC media, but also talk about Amarian Hampton being an All-ACC first-team member, Willie Lampkin being on there as well. And so make sure you go and check that out. Josh has an article up about Carolina being put 8th in the preseason poll by the media. So read that as well. And then, of course, all of the position previews are online there. It goes more in depth on some of the information about all the guys that we talked about tonight. So make sure that you guys are on there looking at that. And if you want to be prepared for the next edition of the podcast, make sure you check out the offensive line preview in specific. That'll be the next group that we will talk about, and we will do that on Sunday night. So be on the lookout for that. That's what's happening on the football side of things. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, again, still in the offseason. There is recruiting stuff that is going on. But again, we are getting closer and closer to the start of the season for Carolina basketball. And we're going to take you right up to that. It's going to be it's more of a toss-up year, I think, this year in terms of where people stand on them. Now, it's a toss-up in terms of thinking they're a Sweet 16 team or potentially a national title contender. So that'll be interesting. We'll be debating that, going back and forth, with you guys and, other media pundits that come on the podcast throughout the preseason. So make sure you're keeping an eye out for articles on the website, and make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast feed for the Four Corners podcast. Same thing with the Heel Tough Blog podcast, wherever you get your podcast. But most importantly, guys, make sure you're visiting HeelToughBlog.com every single day for the latest Tar Heel football and basketball news. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.